Joining us now is James Morrow, host of the US Report and the Daily Telegraph's National Affairs editor. James, great to see you.
Great to be here.
Huge news today and all week. There's a lot to unpack. But of course, the big news today, confirmation that these 5 players of the Iranian women's soccer team have been granted humanitarian visas. The footballers have been, of course, facing the risk of being persecuted, going back to Iran after not singing the national anthem so bravely before their match against South Korea. Now, a key person involved in this, the President of the United States. He, of course, posted on Truth Social, Australia is making a terrible humanitarian mistake by allowing the Iran national women's soccer team to be forced back to Iran, where they will most likely be killed. Don't do it, Mr. Prime Minister. Give them asylum. The US will take them if you won't. Thank you for your attention to this matter. And then he gets on the phone to Anthony Albanese. And what do you know, a few hours later, we get an outcome, James?
Well, yeah, you know, it's sort of like the thing about Anthony Albanese is he's sort of like what Winston Churchill said about the Americans. He can be counted on to do the right thing after all other options have been exhausted. Now, this is the thing. I mean, Albo didn't really seem to want to get too involved with this. Tony Burke certainly didn't want to get involved in this, and he's been dragged into this. And I mean, he looked almost like he was kind of doing a hostage photo when he was there, sort of smiling with the Iranian women, because you know that this is going to cause some other troubles with him and some of his other constituencies that might, shall we say, be a little bit more pro-Iranian, and we've seen some of that coming out in the last week or so. Look, this is great news. It's an amazing story. To me, it reminds me so much of the Petrov affair in 1947, when a pair of Soviet diplomats, actually they were KGB spies, defected here in Australia. Robert Menzies was prime minister. The husband made a clean getaway, but the KGB tried to bundle the wife back to the Soviet Union. Now, he had ASIO agents basically get on the plane at Darwin when it stopped to refuel and take her off and get her off the plane and save her from the clutches of the KGB. Feels very much like the same sort of thing, except I don't think we could compare Anthony Albanese to Robert Menzies.
Don't think so either, but it's interesting you make the point about Tony Burke. You know, being dragged into this, because we heard Matt Thistlethwaite just on Sunday saying, essentially saying that they won't be offered asylum, and then a few days later have suddenly been apparently working around the clock to make sure that they were. Yeah,
it's really interesting because I mean this blows up all of the contradictions on the left here. I mean, like, I want to do a welfare check on Grace Tame. How is she going with this here? You know, why would these women, these feminist women want to be in Australia when Iran is out there globalizing the Intifada, which is just what she wants to happen? So, look, there's so many hypocrisies on the left. I think it's a great human story. It's a fantastic story for freedom. I hope that something can happen with the other young women on this team here, because I don't want to see anybody going back. But the biggest thing that we have to hope for is that the regime actually does fall, it does change, and that you do get a free Iran so that they can go back and be with their families or stay here if they want to. And we can all go to Iran if we want to one day.
I know no one has a crystal ball, but what's your assessment? Do you think this regime could fall in just a few weeks?
Look, the IRGC, so it's really complicated. The way Iran is governed, it's sort of 2 or 3 different big power structures. There's something called the Ardesh, which is the sort of the National Defense Force. It is not political. It's not theocratic. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, that's where power seems to be held. Now, this new Ayatollah that they've got, Mojtaba, the son of Khamenei, apparently he's been very badly injured already in an airstrike. I've heard potentially that he's lost a leg. He may not even know that he has been nominated the new Ayatollah in, the great reality show, Iran's Next Top Cleric. So we don't know what's going to happen with him. Look, Trump seems very serious about not just saying we are degrading the weapons, because what he said the other day was very important. He said we can't be going back there every 5 or 10 years. There has to be some sort of permanent change, whether that's a transitional authority under the Shah, whether it's something else. But one thing I would say is that look for the Ardesh, which is the non-theological, non-politicized state sort of police and army to play a big role in that. The big challenge, of course, will also be, debathification was the big thing that they screwed up after Iraq. So what do you do with all the people who were involved with the RGC? You need to have some sort of program. Again, you go back to history, and I know I always go back to history, but it's important. Do what they did with the denazification program in Germany. How do you make sure that the people who were involved with the really bad stuff don't get in power, but the people who are there who are involved with just keeping the country running do have a role, and that's a really critical thing.
And there's been a development today that, the Australian government has announced that Australia will be sending missiles, personnel and a plane to the Gulf to help defend states that are under attack from Iran. Penny Wong on Sunday said that Gulf states asked for help, and then the Prime Minister today revealed that military assistance would go to the UAE and that Defence Force personnel would be deployed for an initial 4 weeks. It's going to be a bit longer than 4 weeks.
Well, it's going to be a bit longer than 4 weeks, but also I kind of feel like this is a bit of a tell that they know that the hostilities are going to be starting to wind down soon, because we don't have the power to the force that we can really project. Remember in 22, Albanese refused to send a ship to the Red Sea when they were asking for help with the Houthis and keeping shipping going through the Red Sea. We don't really have the ability to project power. This is a huge indictment on the way we've managed our defense forces, and it's terrible. Both sides of politics, I think, have mismanaged this. But that's another story. I think that what's happened, though, we've seen we're 10 days in, Iran's missile barrages have dropped by about 80 or 90%. Their drone strikes have, dropped by that much too. So we're coming in, sort of to the last quarter of this phase of the operation. That's what I think.
That's extraordinary, because we're hearing so much anger from some of the leftist media saying this is going to be a forever war, and is it over yet? And
I'll let you into a secret, Gab. I'm going to let you into a secret. The left want it to be a forever war. The left want it to be a quagmire.
Well, you know what? Leftist media, I'm going to we'll take a whack at Hollywood elites, including Ben Stiller, in a moment. But first, while we're talking about the leftist media, what do you make of the leftist media's coverage of this bomb threat, or alleged bomb threat, in New York City, of these 2 ISIS-inspired terrorists, allegedly, throwing bombs at protests? And if you were watching the coverage, you'd think that they were white supremacists, James.
Well, this is the thing. You can see the way that they manipulate the coverage. So to set the story up, on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, very near where I grew up, by the way, so I take this very personally, Gracie Mansion, which is the mayor's official residence, there was a group of anti-Islam protesters, and they were basically saying, Islam doesn't belong in America, and Islam is a violent religion. So then there was a bunch of counter-protesters, and there's this amazing scene where, this very liberal white New Yorker is saying, everybody is welcome here, and just as he does it, this guy jumps onto his shoulder and allegedly flings this bomb that had explosives and allegedly all sorts of shrapnel. It would have been a complete disaster if it had gone off, like a real sort of, anti-people kind of, to spread, shrapnel everywhere and to injure and maim and kill as many people as possible. And allegedly, this was one of 2 people who had done this because they had self-radicalized. They were Turkish Muslims, I think, from their parents had immigrated from there. They lived there. This is really interesting, in a place called Bucks County, Pennsylvania. So it's outside New York City. Very, very well-off area. I've seen pictures of their house that they grew up in, and I think we're still living. This would be the equivalent in Sydney if, like, somebody from, Barrel self-radicalized and came from the Southern Highlands, or somebody from the Mornington Peninsula in Melbourne self-radicalized and then, came into Melbourne or into Sydney and did something. So, but we've seen this trend too before also, where upper middle class kids are very often the ones who do these sorts of things. The May 5th bombers on those London buses in, 10 years ago, however long that was, they were all upper middle class kids, migrants. The 9/11 hijackers, they were all from upper middle class families. This idea that this sort of terrorism or alleged terrorism, is perpetrated by, the wretched of the earth is actually completely not true. It is an upper middle class cosplay fantasy that gets out of control and people get killed.
and then you read about it or you watch, the mainstream media, and you don't really get the details, the crucial details.
Well, you don't. And this is the whole thing, because it's like we keep hearing it. It's become this line. Albanese says it. Mayor Mamdani, when he spoke about it, the first thing he did was condemn Islamophobia. I'm like, are you hearing yourself here? And the narrative has to always be the greatest threat is white supremacy. Now, I'm not saying white supremacy is good, but I'm just saying, look at the scoreboard.
Exactly. I mean, in Mamdani's tweet, he called out white supremacy, but didn't call out radical Islam or, what's potentially, allegedly behind this threat. Look, let's move on to Ben Stiller, because just back on, this historic operation that's going on in Iran, Donald Trump keeping his promise, really making sure Iran does not have a nuclear threat. Ben Stiller is complaining about the White House social media post. He wrote, "Hey, White House, please remove the Tropic Thunder clip. We never gave you permission and have no interest in being part of your propaganda machine. War is not a movie." Let's just play the clip that he's upset about.
Wake up, Daddy's home.
Welcome home, son.
Strength and honor.
Strength and honor.
What will you do without freedom?
Maverick sent out.
You can't conceive of what I'm capable of.
Finishing this fight.
Yeah, I'm thinking I'm back.
I mean, brave men and women are right now fighting a war in Iran, and Ben Stiller is upset.
He's making it all about him. He's making it all about him. And, the thing is, they're furious at Hollywood, because Hollywood is furious because, Trump is using their product, and the White House social media team is so good because they can pull all these pop culture sorts of things, cut them together into these very intense videos, so Braveheart, all these sorts of things to tell their story. It's a very new form of storytelling that they do really, really well. I mean, I guess the only thing I could say is, never go full Ben Stiller.
Okay, let's talk about Keir Starmer. I don't know who's worse, Ben Stiller or Keir Starmer?
Keir Starmer, well, is worse because allegedly he's the man in charge of Great Britain. I'm actually not so sure about that, but anyway, allegedly, he's the man at the top of the tree there under the king. But the thing about Keir Starmer here, he has presided over the greatest national humiliation of Britain I think we have seen literally since probably 1066. This has been such an epic disaster for them, and Donald Trump has quite rightly called him out for this. Winston Churchill famously said, his advice to every prime minister, never become separated from the Americans. Never become separated from the Americans. And he has completely done this. And part of the thing, too, is that the British military is now so run down, they have no power at all to fight this war at all. They were going to send an aircraft carrier to their one functioning aircraft carrier to the Gulf. But this is how humiliating and embarrassing it became for them. They couldn't do it because they were going to need French ships to escort them. If you think about the English requiring the help of the French Navy, the English used to rule the seas. The English and the British Empire, the key thing that they did was they maintained control of all of these choke points, like the Straits of Hormuz, everywhere else, around the Horn of Africa, everywhere else, so that free commerce could flow. And they gave that up step by step. Starmer is destroying the UK in ways I never thought possible. And frankly, it's very hard to see how they recover from the national beating that they have taken. And it's all self-imposed. It's all self-imposed.
And Donald Trump saying, labeling Britain now our once great ally, says so much, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it was a great ally, and it was a great ally for decades, and even weathered things in the 20th century, like the Suez Crisis, But now it's just that special relationship. It's over, and it is Britain's doing. It is not Trump's doing. It is Britain's failure to maintain its end of the bargain.
I completely agree with you, James Morrow. Thank you so much for coming in. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much.